What's up, you guys? I'm super sweaty, but that's because today we're breaking down a simple freestyle concept that you can utilize to provide your rounds with more structure and more direction. So let's just go ahead and hop into this breakdown. Before we get started with this video, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is actually a 10-minute segment from a longer form video that you can find at the top link in the description. The full version of this video is basically like an hour-long virtual hip-hop class that you can access completely for free at the top link. I have the first 10 minutes for you over here on YouTube, but if you want the full hour, I would recommend clicking that top link in the description because it'll take you straight over to our page on Patreon. We upload more exclusive content over there, and so if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the concepts that we cover in this video, I definitely recommend that you click that first link in the top of the description. For those of us continuing here on YouTube, let's just jump into this video. So we're going to be breaking down this concept into 4 separate sections. All 4 of these sections you can kind of think of as sort of prompts for your freestyle and sort of just different ideas or different ways that you can play with or manipulate your movement. These are meant to be more so like inspirations or ideas that you can utilize in the moment that will help you to pull from or to recall the knowledge that you already have about hip-hop dance. My goal with this concept is to help us to be able to more quickly pull from our own personal bag and pull from the knowledge that we already have about hip-hop dance. So rather than thinking about this concept as like a new idea or like a new step or something more like that, I want to think instead about this concept sort of working as a new way to look at the movements that we already have in our bag, if that makes any sense. I'm hoping that it'll help you guys to kind of start to look at your movement or the concepts that you play around with while you freestyle in a little bit of a different way. I really want to encourage you guys to just have patience with the movement ideas that we're breaking down today. Don't feel like you have to rush into everything, or just try to kind of pull back a little bit and don't focus on this idea of making things look complicated. Just focus on this idea of tapping into your body and into your responses while you're freestyling. Try to tap into something a little bit deeper. We're trying to build that mind-body connection within our freestyle so that we can shorten the time between when we have an idea to do something and our body's response to that thought. So we want to, in theory and ideally, diminish that space to be instant. We can think of something, or at least think about something beforehand that we want to do, and then execute that thing, if that makes sense. So to kind of break down this first section, we're going to be thinking about sort of starting our exploration with just some basic hip-hop fundamentals. So we're going to be utilizing this concept of bounce, okay? This is sort of going to work as the foundational layer or structure for the rest of our round. Everything that we do from here is sort of going to be built off of this first layer. So we sort of establish our bounce as kind of a first building block, or just a first idea to give us some direction to play around with. So we have our bounce, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now obviously with your bounce, there's so many different ways that you can play around with just that. You can play around with like the way that you bounce. You can play around with the level or the texture of your bounce. You can play around with the effort that you're putting in, or even the timing. We're going to get a little bit more into timing a little bit later in this video, but even just thinking about your bounce and all of the different ways that you can play around with it. This is our first layer. We're going to get into some more ways that we can play around with it a little bit later, but for now, we just want to think about our bounce working as sort of our base layer for our exploration. So that's our first layer. Our second layer is going to be our rock. Bounce and rock, yeah? Bounce and rock, the 2 most fundamental and important components of hip-hop dance. So in addition to exploring our bounce and just sort of starting with this, we can start to incorporate our upper body. Start to play around with utilizing our torso. We can rock side to side. We can rock front to back. So many different ways that we can play around with that. This is sort of a new dimension that we start to add to our movement. Instead of just going up and down with our bounce, we can start to play around with taking things to more horizontal angles, if that makes sense. Starting to play around with the horizontal plane versus just the vertical plane, yeah? So thinking about all the different ways that you can play around with your rock as you are bouncing, all the different combinations, the different tempo, and just the new dimension that adds to your dance. Sort of thinking about these first two layers as like the body of our movement. This is the center of everything that we're gonna do. From there, we can start to play around with changing or manipulating our foot placement, yeah? So changing our foot placement simply just means to change where our feet are placed on the floor underneath us. So we start with this sort of central foundational idea of our bounce and our rock. From there, we can start to play around with moving our feet a bit, which maybe takes us around the room, or maybe it just changes the shape that we're making with our body a little bit, you know, sort of changing where our feet are being placed. Now, there's so much creativity when it comes to your feet. You can play around with vocabulary steps. You can play around with different patterns and different concepts. If you understand the compass concept or the 9-square concept, just playing around with all the different ways that you can utilize and incorporate your feet as you are also playing around with your bounce and your rock, right? Now, the cool thing about approaching our freestyle in this way is that we're sort of starting with the two most important elements of hip-hop dance, meaning that we're basing our exploration in the foundation of hip-hop versus just basing it in whatever comes to our head in the moment, if that makes sense. Not just basing it off of our own movement, but basing it off of a foundational concept, basing it off of a foundational movement idea that is central to the style of hip-hop dance. So as we do that, it sort of changes the way that we explore, and it becomes a little bit less about me having to always make up a new movement while I'm freestyling versus being able to tap into movement concepts, ideas, and vocabulary that already exist within hip-hop dance that I can utilize in my own freestyle and in my own way. So that's kind of the cool thing about approaching our freestyle like this. Now, when it comes to our feet, we can play around with putting our feet in different places on the floor, just stepping, playing around with different vocabulary ideas, playing around with crawls, kick step rocks, all that sort of stuff. We can also play around with picking our feet up, putting them back down, opening them to the side. Like, you can make a choice. Do I want my foot to come up, or do I want to keep it on the floor as I'm bouncing? Another idea to kind of keep in mind as we're exploring all of these concepts is that we don't need to think about establishing one concept and then maintaining it exactly the same the whole time. So even though we're starting with our bounce and then we're adding in our rock, that doesn't mean that we have to keep that exploration going exactly the same the whole time. We want to think more so about starting with our bounce, keeping it in place, but not necessarily like feeling like we have to bounce the same exact way the whole time that we're dancing. It's more so meant to work as like a starting point, and then from there, we sort of evolve our exploration. It sort of becomes something a little bit different. It's still there, and we can still always revert back to our bounce and utilize it, but we're not necessarily maintaining it for the entirety of our round, if that makes sense. So we have our first three layers. We have our bounce, we have our rock, and we have this idea of playing with our foot placement. And there's no rules to that. Any way that you know how to play around with your foot placement or to play around with your feet, you can use hooks, you can skate, you can step, you can kick, step, rock. Utilize any ideas that you know for playing around with your feet in this exercise, starting with your bounce and then incorporating the feet and the rock with the upper body. Thinking also about the relationship of the upper body when you're rocking with your feet and with your bounce. Like maybe you isolate the rock in the upper body and the feet at different times. We're gonna get a little bit more into that later in this video. And then the last little layer that we're going to add that is going to work as sort of the base or the body or the movement for the rest of this video is to think about utilizing or incorporating our arms, yeah? So thinking about our arms as sort of their own separate thing, we can utilize gestures. Basically, when I say gestures, I just mean talking or communicating with your hands, utilizing your hands to communicate something without saying words. You know, like when you watch hip hop, music videos, or performances, artists on stage, a lot of times they'll utilize their hands. They'll be playing to the camera or to the crowd. Hip hop, dance, or just hip hop culture in general, there's a lot of talking or communicating with the hands. Hands are utilized a lot to make or to emphasize a point. And so I like to utilize gestures as I'm freestyling because it feels very true to the style in my mind. It's also just very helpful and gives me something to do with my arms. Another idea that we can play around with our hands is hand placement, just different placements of the hand on different parts of the body. We can put a hand on the knee, put a hand on the shoulder, hands on the head. We can utilize the hands just in different ways, creating different points of connection as we're freestyling to help sort of change the shape or change the intention of the movements that we're playing around with. So that is the fourth and final layer, thinking about utilizing and incorporating our hands into this little layer cake that we're building of our freestyle. We start with our bounce as the first layer, our rock as the second layer, our feet as the third layer, and then our arms as the fourth layer. And you can see that when you sort of start with one layer and then you add the other layers, it sort of helps you to isolate your movement a little bit better in your head, as opposed to thinking about always having to do everything all at once, which can just feel overwhelming. It is a way to sort of delineate and to make more deliberate decisions, to sort of peel back the layers and to be like, okay, I can just start with my bounce. And then naturally from there, you're going to feel like, oh, maybe I can start to incorporate my upper body a little bit. And then maybe from there, you feel something a little bit different. Like, man, I want to start like utilizing my feet. Maybe my bounce sort of takes on a little bit of a different tone, or I'm utilizing it a little bit differently, but I utilized it to get me started, and now I'm moving in a direction, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like this idea of starting with raw materials versus starting with a blank slate, if that makes any sense. It would be a lot harder to build a house if you had to go out and harvest all of the materials, chop down all the trees, and cut all the logs and finish them before you even started building the house. If you started building a house with a giant pile of lumber that would complete the entire project, that would be a lot easier because you could just start working with the materials versus having to like go out and search for them and maybe not even be able to find all of them right in that moment. So that's kind of the idea that we're playing around with and more the methodology that we're utilizing for this concept. So there's obviously lots of different ways that you can play around with your movement, but we're sort of thinking about, for this video, just isolating our movement and our body into those 4 different components. We're going to play around with a lot of different ways that we can utilize those components later in this video. But this sort of layer cake of movements that we've constructed is going to primarily work as the base for all of the other exploration that we're going to do throughout the rest of this video. We have our bounce as the first layer. We have our rock as the second layer. We have our foot placement as the third layer. And then our arms as the fourth layer, yeah? Now, any creativity or any decisions that you want to make, any different ways that you want to play around with those different parts of the body is completely up to you. And I'm not even saying that you always have to work in that exact order. You don't have to start with the bounce, move into the rock, then do the feet, then do the arms, right? It's more so just to help you to isolate all 4 of those components or all 4 of those parts of your body in your mind, so that you can make more deliberate and informed choices with your freestyle, if that makes sense. So before we move on to the next section of this concept, we're just going to take some time to explore these 4 components, this sort of base that we're going to be utilizing throughout the rest of this video with some music by itself. So just sort of thinking about isolating and utilizing our bounce, our rock, our foot placement, and our arms, just in whatever way we wish to. The idea here is not necessarily for you to explore exactly like I am, but it's more so meant to be a prompt for you to specifically explore what you know about these 4 components. What do you know about bounce? How do you like to play around with your bounce? How do you utilize your rock while you're dancing? How do you like to play around with your feet? What footwork concepts or steps do you most commonly utilize when you're freestyling? And then how do you stylize with your arms, right? This is sort of like the body of our hip hop movement. Like when we're talking about hip hop dance, this is kind of like what it is. We have bounce, rock, and then we are basically just changing where our feet are and our arms go as we feel led by the music. And so try to get lost in it. Try to get lost in your exploration. You can utilize 1 layer or 2 layers together. You don't have to utilize all 4. I really also encourage this idea of just practicing slowly and maybe practicing with a little bit less effort than you normally would. I don't think that always dancing super big and super full out is the best, because sometimes that just makes us like kind of snowplow through everything without actually thinking critically and developing control over our movements. So even if you have to pull it back a little bit and be a little bit more chill and a little bit more controlled, if that means that it'll help you to more accurately reflect what the music is saying, then I would rather that than just going super big and full out for the sake of going super big and full out, but not really thinking about what you're doing, right? What we're trying to do with this exercise is we're trying to cultivate more mindfulness in our freestyle. So we're going to turn on some music. We're going to take some time to just explore with those layers, and then we're going to move on to the next section of this concept.